Okay, good morning, everyone. It's 8:15, so we're gonna get started. I am Adriana Burke with Tetra Tech, and Tetra Tech is helping support this forum. Tetra Tech is providing the moderators and the organizers for each one of the sessions. So this is day 2 of our third and final forum in a series that we've been doing for all Pennsylvania MS4s. So before we get started, I just want to remind everyone, if you get a chance to please fill out the evaluation survey. I posted it a couple times in the link this morning. I sent an email yesterday. We'll send an email again this afternoon. We really want to hear your feedback of how the sessions went. If there are further trainings in the future, you can let us know what worked well, what didn't, so that we can always improve these trainings for you. Secondly, when you use the agenda to move in and out of the sessions, please remember to hit the leave button, go back to the agenda, click on the title link of the session you want to attend. When you enter that session, please have your cameras turned off. So there should be an option when you first go, it says join, there's an option, a slide button for camera and microphone. Have the camera and microphone slide off so that when you enter, then we have the best possible bandwidth for our speakers to start to share their presentation, and it comes across clear for all attendees. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason with Tetra Tech to kick off today's session.
Good morning. Thank you all for joining us. Just want to remind everyone that the presentations and information offered as part of this MS4 forum are the views and experiences of the organizations presenting. The EPA and the Pennsylvania DEP do not endorse any one approach or funding strategy. The views and the opinions expressed by the speakers and the speakers' organizations are their own and do not reflect those of the EPA or the Pennsylvania DEP. Mention of any commercial enterprise, product, or publication does not indicate an EPA or Pennsylvania DEP endorsement. And also I want to take a minute to thank all of our speakers. So Ellen, who's going to kick us off today, but also everyone who's speaking in the sessions to come. We appreciate everyone's time and sharing their experiences with everyone to help serve as a learning opportunity for their fellow permittees and local decision makers. So we'll get right to it. Starting us off today is Ellen Kohler. She's the Program Director of Water Resources at the Environmental Finance Center at the University of Maryland. She's going to tell us a little bit about the basics of financing.
Thanks very much, Jason. Can everybody hear me this morning? For those of you who are not familiar with the Environmental Finance Center, we are one of 10 university-based centers. Each one serves an EPA region. We serve EPA Region 3, which includes Pennsylvania. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. I've been working in Pennsylvania with municipalities on their MS4 permits for the last 7 years, the last 3 years with the EFC, but with other organizations before that. At the Environmental Finance Center, we work with communities to protect natural resources by strengthening the capacity of decision makers to assess needs, develop effective financing methods, and catalyze action. Through direct technical assistance, policy analysis, and research, we equip communities with the knowledge and tools they need to create more sustainable environments, more resilient and just societies, and more robust economies. We do have 2 flagship programs. One is called the MOST Center, which is the Municipal Online Stormwater Training Center, and the other is the Sustainable Maryland program, which is a certification program similar to Sustainable Pennsylvania. That is a collaborative effort between EFC and the Maryland Municipal League. So in our setting today, we're talking obviously about stormwater. I just want to put that in context. We manage stormwater in several different ways through several different programs developed both through federal and state legislation. So on industrial sites, often those are managed either through a specific individual NPDES permit or through a permit that is managed by the wastewater treatment plant. We manage urban runoff through what we're going to talk about today, our MS4 permits. At construction sites, it's managed through Pennsylvania Chapter 102, which also, as we all know, is part of our MS4 permit minimum control measures. Post-construction is managed through Pennsylvania's Public Act 167, also part of your MS4 MCMs. And then non-point source pollution is managed through both Section 319 and state level programs that help communities and agricultural landowners manage runoff. So our municipal program was developed to get, water from our impervious areas are, creating a lot of pollution issues. And that those pollution issues are only exacerbated now because we have larger challenges as a result of heavier storm events. So we're getting larger storm events, which means more rain, which also means increased flooding. And those larger storm events can cause different kinds of pollution threats as a result of potentially extreme flooding. So we have the pollution that's occurring from impervious cover that is already causing challenges to our streams, but we have the potential as well for some other kinds of pollution sources depending on the community where you live. When we work with communities at the Environmental Finance Center, we start by assessing, we use this sort of basic process, this basic 5-step process, and we start by identifying where the community is in this process. You're always doing you're always doing outreach and communication within your community. That's really important, no matter where you are in this process. But you might be just starting your stormwater program. Since you all are here, you've already got an MS4 permit and probably, I hope, beyond the creating a program piece. But you've got to look at your future needs, your programmatic gaps, determine where you want to, what your level of service is going to be, what you want to be doing for your community, and evaluate the cost of getting to that level of service. Then you got to look at what that means in terms of your budget and then develop a financing strategy. When we look at this 5-step process, we are looking both at gray and green infrastructure. If your community does have pipes and inlets, for example, it should be part of this conversation as well. So once you've assessed your current program and evaluated your future needs, they're going to be, what you're really doing in terms of coming up with your financing strategy is pairing up the activities you need to finance, the partners you need to work with, and the revenue streams you're going to use to pay for those activities. So, different communities are going to have a different combination of activities they need to fund, a different set of partners, and a different set of revenue streams. So this, what the outcomes of these financing strategies are going to look different depending on each community. There are several sources for funding for stormwater programs. This table lists some of the common ones that we see. I'm not going to run through the entire table. Some involve debt financing, some do not. But I do want to emphasize, and I'm sure this will come up in the session on PennVest funding, you do not have to have a stormwater fee to access PennVest loans or other bond financing. Each one has its strengths and weaknesses. Some can be used for capital investment and some can be used for operations and maintenance. I will be honest that we don't see a lot of tax districts or special assessment districts just for stormwater in Pennsylvania. There are some variability throughout the region, but we don't see a lot of that in Pennsylvania. It's important when you're thinking about managing all the facilities within your stormwater system that we keep in mind that each one has a life cycle, both gray and green. They don't last forever. And while we all know that we're focused right now potentially on implementing projects to achieve our pollution reduction plans, for example, but that acquisition period, that implementation period is only one element of that life cycle. And actually, for most BMPs, for most gray infrastructure, the operations and maintenance piece across most of that life cycle is going to cost more than the acquisition cost. It's something really important that we keep in mind and that we are managing for in terms of our financing strategy. So there are some obvious budgeting implications from this so far. So first of all, we've got to understand what your upfront costs are for those BMPs and how does timing implement the municipality's cash flow? So if you want to implement some BMPs in your community, when do you want to do it? And does the revenue source that you want to use to pay for it match up with when you want to implement that BMP? Do the BMPs serve other community priorities? Can you achieve the most that you possibly can with that municipal dollar, right? So is your project, say, managing runoff from a road? So you're creating, you're addressing public safety on your roadways by also managing that runoff. Is that runoff potentially creating a flooding challenge in a park so that your park can't be used? We had a great example during the last forum of a community that had a floodplain project that made the park more accessible, actually expanded the flood capacity for managing stormwater, and also addressed water quality. Who should pay for what kind of BMP implementation? If you're doing a BMP that is managing runoff from private property, are you collecting the appropriate amount of money from that private property owner to pay for that BMP? Or is that property owner potentially a nonprofit property owner that may not be paying property taxes? And if general funds are your source, are they paying anything? If it's an HOA, do they have an escrow account that is sufficient to manage the operation and maintenance piece of that BMP? So that gets us into one of the first questions here. Are we talking about BMP? Are we talking about managing stormwater on municipal lands or on private lands? So one of the things I hope you've all done is reviewed your regulations to see where you are actually incentivizing impervious cover. For example, and the Center for Watershed Protection has this great code and ordinance worksheet that you can run through and think about how your ordinance is potentially creating more impervious cover than you need. So, for example, the code and ordinance worksheet will ask whether you have maximums or minimums for parking areas. So you might actually think about, well, you want to have maximums. That's going to help you plan for the maximum amount of impervious cover that a certain land use is going to be implementing for parking. And that also helps you think about whether and when you want to shift the risk and cost of that asset management, of managing that stormwater facility, to those seeking to build that impervious cover or building more impervious cover. You also want to look at whether you're going to be investing in new best management practices or you're going to retrofit existing practices. So, for example, if you're looking at new, I know that a lot of BMPs in Pennsylvania, a lot of PRPs in Pennsylvania are considering stream bank restoration projects. Generally, those are going to be new projects. They generally have higher upfront costs. They could be very responsive to that permit need. We all know the argument around, that they create a big bang for your buck. They may or may not, depending on what your community is facing, be more responsive to current community priorities. Retrofitting existing stormwater basins, not surprisingly, has lower upfront costs. For example, you already know where you've got that facility, so land acquisition isn't usually a challenge, although accessing it may be, depending on land ownership. But retrofitting, the value of it can depend on where it is in its life cycle. If this is, a stormwater basin that is in the beginning or middle of its life cycle, investing in that retrofit is probably going to be a really cost-effective strategy. But for any asset, for any stormwater facility, investing at the end of that life cycle is probably not the best choice, right? I also want you to keep in mind that retrofitting existing infrastructure means not just that physical infrastructure, but also our administrative infrastructure. So this is an example from Derry Township. This is a picture of their wastewater treatment facility that obviously flooded. It made them realize that their wastewater authority might be a good, it might be good to expand the authority of that existing infrastructure, administrative infrastructure, to also manage stormwater. That's what they did. So they had sort of similar service areas. It was easy for them to bill customers. They did adopt a stormwater fee after realizing that they needed $11 million in repairs and needed to invest $15 million in green stormwater infrastructure to address stormwater and flooding. So they, that's how they decided in that community to use that municipal authority and expand its jurisdiction. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about roads. You're all managing a lot of impervious cover in terms of your municipal roads right now. And most of you in most townships are, for example, are managing the majority of roads and road miles in your township. You think about what kind of funding sources you have available for managing that road runoff. You know you need to manage it to make those roads safe. So if you add a water quality element to how you're managing that runoff, you're checking two boxes. You're addressing that public safety, and you are also addressing your MS4 permit. Think about, who are your partners in this program? Do you have county or state road managers that could be partnering with you? Do you have a local or regional transportation management association? Those seem to be a little more common in the eastern part of the state than potentially in the central part of the state, but maybe there's an opportunity to work with others in your community. Can you work with other municipalities to develop partnership programs if one doesn't exist? So for example, we know that there are communities that are sharing street sweepers. There are other ways that you guys could be partnering and collaborating, sharing services in terms of managing your roads. This is a place where you have existing revenue streams. So the question is, how can you use those revenue streams for multiple purposes to achieve the goals for your community? And wrapped into that is thinking about adopting what we call a dig once strategy. And what that means is if you're going to do, say, some work in a roadway because there's a need to address a utility underneath the roadway, that's an opportunity then also incorporate into that project some stormwater management. And that means that you're going to be doing the permitting, the design, and the planning for all of that work at one time. That creates efficiencies, right? And in examining the city of Lancaster, the EPA found that they experienced a reduction in costs of 45% by incorporating those stormwater projects into their capital improvement planning process. So really important strategy to think about in terms of saving money on the planning, designing, and permitting parts of those projects. Another strategy to consider, and I sort of touched on this a little bit, is shared services agreements. So we have an example in the Eastern Shore of Maryland where several communities have joined together to fund a staff person who looks for ways to leverage the resources that those communities have, helps plan and prioritize projects, and helps speed up the delivery of those stormwater BMPs. And so, for example, what they're doing is this circuit rider, as they call them, says, okay, this year we're going to be looking at riparian buffer projects, or right now we're looking at riparian buffer projects. Who's got riparian buffer projects? Goes out and finds a contractor who can implement those projects. And because of they're going to be implementing multiple projects, that reduces the costs to the communities to have those projects implemented. So it's a way of aggregating projects, of having somebody help find that contractor and be responsible for getting those projects implemented. And the last thing I want to touch on here is engaging with partners. I think a lot of you are already doing this, and your communities have a lot of expertise and resources within these kinds of partner organizations. And the more you can tap into them, the more you can bring their expertise to the table, the more you're leveraging their capacity to help your community achieve its goals that you need to in terms of addressing water quality and your MS4 permit. So conservation districts have multiple programs and people on staff who have a lot of expertise and also often have access to funding. County planning commissions, your economic development councils, there are resources that come through the Department of the DCED that you could access for implementing stormwater projects. So keep these folks in mind. They may be non-traditional partners for you, but seek them out and see if you have some creative ways of working with them. Watershed organizations, land conservancies, schools, colleges, and universities. Yesterday we heard a great presentation about in Lycoming how they're using university students and internships during the summer to implement different kinds of monitoring programs. So think about these partners, who you have in your communities, and how they can help you with your MS4 permit needs. So just a couple of education resources I want to touch on here. This is the homepage for our MOST Center. These are all classes that are offered virtually that you can tap into anytime that you would like. We obviously in Pennsylvania have great resources as well through the Pennsylvania State Extension. This is their homepage for their stormwater management. Great resources, plenty of articles, lots of webinars to watch to get more information on any topic that you're interested in. So two really great and important sources for you. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up for this introductory session. We are going to be going into you have three different choices now. One is to be going into a session on Penvest funding. Another is to be going into a session on stormwater fees. And then I will be talking about grants and how they can help you out with your MS4 financing strategies. Jason?
Great, thank you, Ellen. So I think you've pretty well summed it up, but I think as Adriana said, now we can leave this meeting, go back to the agenda and click on one of the three topics that you'd like to hear about. We'll see you all over there.